Okay, the next topic in our journey of statistical fun is called confidence intervals. So our 51st entry, Chapter 5, we're going to talk about a couple of key terms. Confidence intervals have a lot of different words that we use to sort of describe what's going on with them. So we're going to talk about some of the key terms. We're going to get the idea of a confidence interval in our head somehow. And we're going to talk about the importance of a sample size. You'll see what that means. And we'll talk about the importance of something called a confidence level. So a confidence level and a confidence interval are two different things, but we'll see how they're all related together. Okay, so here's an example. And the good thing, or the thing I really like about this topic is it's kind of, stuff that you hear on the radio, you read in the newspaper, you see on television, you read on a website. They always give you these polls or studies and all this stuff, and they expect you to understand what they're talking about when they spew a bunch of ugly numbers. Well, we're going to try and decipher some of that now so we really understand it well. It says a study used a sample of 500 people from a population. The study predicted that 75% of those sampled planned to buy a new car this year. Okay. And the study is said to be accurate at plus or minus 3% 19 times out of 20. What the heck does any of that mean? Okay, so let's see if we can decipher that. So we got three main words that we or three main phrases or terms that we want to get down here. Confidence interval, confidence level, and margin of error. Okay. So the confidence interval says they predicted that 75% of those people plan to buy a new car this year. And they say they're accurate within 3% plus or minus, so either way, above 75 or below 75, which means we would predict with relative confidence that between 72% and 78%, which is 3% above and below the 75, are going to buy a new car. Now, if we sampled 500 people, then that would mean we'd guess that it's probably between 360 and 390 of them, because 72% of 500 is 360, and 78% of 500 is 390. So between 360 and 390 of them are going to buy a new car this year. Okay, but what's this stuff about 19 times out of 20? Well, what that means is it tells you how confident you are in that prediction. So 19 times out of 20, if you take that as a fraction, you've got 19 divided by 20, which is 0.95, or 95%, another way to say that. So what we're saying here is that we're 95% sure that in our general population, between 72% and 78% of the people are going to buy a new car this year. And that's what all that means. That's what we call our confidence level, whatever percentage we're willing to call our confidence level. So that's really about reliability. How reliable is what we're saying? And the reliability is this confidence level. The margin of error is what we quote as the plus or minus above or below the number that we're predicting. And when we go above and below that number that we're predicting for that margin of error, that tells us what our confidence interval is. So sometimes you'll see a confidence interval like this one stated in a different way. So sometimes what we say is that, this is the same example, by the way, sometimes we say that the confidence interval is like a predicted range for the statistic in question. So if we use those endpoints, or we can use it as a midpoint plus or minus margin of error. So we said between 360 and 390 people out of that sample. So that would mean we'd have like 375 plus or minus 15 people, sort of thing. So that's another way to say that. You can state a confidence interval with its endpoints, or with a midpoint plus or minus your margin of error. Okay? So an important thing is that sample of 500 people, that gave us some information, but that doesn't tell us what everybody in the world thinks. But when we take a sample of 500 people, that's a pretty big sample. So as long as it's well designed in the way that we sampled those people, or we chose people to interview or whatever, then we should get a pretty good predictor of what the general population is thinking. And the more people that we sample, the greater we're going to be able to make a more accurate prediction, I should say. So what happens when we increase the sample size? So when we interview more people, or we sample more things, or whatever we're doing for our study, then what happens is our margin of error decreases. Okay, why? It's because a larger sample means less room for error. It means we're more accurate, basically. That's what it's all about. And if we increase the sample size, what does that do to the range of the confidence interval? Well, if we shrink that that margin of error, what that does is it makes our confidence interval smaller. So we can be more confident at that same percentage level, that confidence level that we talked about, that we're in an even smaller interval, we can be more accurate with our prediction. Okay, and it says these relationships are only true if the confidence level remains the same. So this is at the same confidence level, right? So we quote at 95%, which is a pretty common one to quote, actually 19 times out of 20. You see others, but that's the most common, I think, in the mainstream. So importance of confidence level. So if we need to get a higher confidence level, so let's say we're doing a study and I don't know, we're talking about the effectiveness of a drug and we're doing a study for a pharmaceutical company or something, and they want to be like 99% sure that you're within a certain fixed range or within a certain fixed margin of error. So if we hold this margin of error down here, we hold that constant, then a higher confidence level is needed. Well, what that means, we're going to require a larger sample size to improve. If we're holding the same confidence interval, then that will, or sorry, the same margin of error, that will improve our reliability. So how does all this fit together? Well, if we want to keep the same margin of error, then more sampling or a larger sample size means we'll get a higher confidence level. But if we want to keep the same higher confidence level, then more sampling will give us a smaller margin of error. So you win some, you lose some, but basically sampling, larger sample sizes always improve the reliability or the margin of error of a study, depending on which way you want to go. Okay, so a confidence interval is a predicted range of values for a particular statistic. Confidence level is the reliability of the confidence interval. Your margin of error is sort of the half of the width of your interval, so plus or minus whatever. Increasing sample size can decrease the margin of error, or it can decrease the confidence level depending on which of the other two we want to hold constant. Okay, thanks.